Okay, good afternoon, or morning for some of you maybe. And welcome to this webinar on the NEA Big Read. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really glad you did. Some of you, I imagine, may be returning Big Read grantees. We love you. You've been wonderful and supportive and creative and inspiring. Thank you. And some of you, I suspect, are new applicants or thinking about being a new applicant. And we thank you, too, for taking an interest in our program. We're really eager to see what creative ideas you present as well. So a couple housekeeping things. You know, the webinar is in listen-only mode and will be archived in the webinar section on arts.gov. So please do use the Q&A icon at the top of the screen to write in your questions. They're telling me there are talking bubbles. I really don't know what a talking bubble is, but I will. There you go. There's the talking bubble. Excellent. So you can do this at any time during the presentation. We'll be tracking them, and we'll do our best to address your questions at the end of our remarks. All right, off we go. So I'm Amy Stolls. I'm direct the literature program at the National Endowment for the Arts, and joining me are Lauren Miller, who not too long ago took over from Eleanor Billington, who's also here, the role of Big Read Program Manager at the NEA, and Josh Feist, who is the NEA Big Read Program Director at Arts Midwest. Arts Midwest works on behalf of the NEA to manage and facilitate the program with regard to all aspects of the applications and grants. And if you've had any dealings at all with Lauren and Eleanor and Josh, you know how truly lucky we all are to have them at the helm. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of the program and highlight some recent changes, and then briefly present each of the 4 new books and authors on our list that we recently announced. And then I'll hand it over to Josh, who will get into the nitty-gritty a bit about applying for a grant and share some programming examples from current grantees around the country. And then we hope you have questions for us that we can answer. So the NEA Big Read is an initiative managed by Arts Midwest, as I mentioned, that provides annual grants to roughly 75 organizations nationwide to develop and implement community-wide reading programs designed around a single book chosen from a list of titles that we provide. Each program lasts about a month, though there is certainly wiggle room here, I'll tell you. I've witnessed programming that extends over a season, for example. Josh will expand on our programming requirements later on. Grants range from $5,000 to $15,000 each, and I can tell you this is a shift from previous years in which applicants were permitted to request $20,000. And we did this to better reflect our funding capabilities and to ensure that we can continue to support 75 communities each year. So applicants are selected based on their capacity to manage and implement a program, the overall depth and breadth of the program, and their active promotion of the program, and the relevance and depth of involvement of their community partners. Applications are due January 24th. We'll show you that date later on as well. So we are in our 12th year of programming. Since it began, the NEA Big Read has funded more than 1,400 programs, providing more than $19 million in grants to organizations in every district in the country. And we're just so proud of that, I have to say, and eager to continue to try and reach as many communities as we can around the country. And in turn, these organizations have leveraged more than $44 million in local funding to support their Big Read programs. And almost 5 million Americans have attended a Big Read event. 82,000 volunteers have participated at the local level, and 39,000 community organizations have partnered to make Big Read activities possible. Many of these partners are new to arts programming. And I'm happy to report that the Big Read is thriving during the fiscal year 2017-18 period. Programming began in September and has already reached many thousands of people. Grants were given to communities nationwide, from large cities like St. Louis, Juneau, Denver, and Orlando, to smaller communities like Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and Edinburgh, Texas. And the vast array of programming has been phenomenal, particularly art created of inspiration from the books, both from individuals and communities, including sculpture, photographs, paintings, music, theater, and dance. I'll let Josh tell you more about all this and say just one thing here. We do like to see programming that you do as part of an NEA Big Read program be designed to draw audiences not just to the specific event, but to the book itself, preferably in meaningful rather than superficial ways. I mean, this is a big read program after all. So for example, you might have a Chinese cooking class as part of your programming during the Chinese New Year of Hugh Wa's novel To Live. But rather than have that in isolation, you could have copies of the book on display, and it could follow a discussion of the book about how, what, and why certain foods in the novel are prepared and reflect the characters and the setting. Okay, I encourage you to check out the NEA's new website. We worked hard on this, and we're proud of it. It's dedicated to the Big Read. It has lots of great information about the books and authors. I've provided the actual website here, but if you simply Google NEA Big Read, it'll get you to our homepage also. So here are two screenshots to show you an example of what you can find. On the left is our homepage, and if you were to scroll down, you'd see covers of all the books in our Big Read library. And then if you clicked on one of those covers, you'd see something like the screenshot on the right, with tabs that provide a one-paragraph overview of the book and author, an engaging plot summary of the book that doesn't give too much away, a fun and fascinating bio of the author, discussion questions. I should say we're still working on these for the 4 new books. They are forthcoming. You'll find multimedia resources like podcasts and videos and community stories which come from our grantees, offering photos and ideas, success stories, and lessons learned on each book. So grantees, keep those flowing our way. We love them. It's our hope that we will continue to populate these 2 last tabs with fun and helpful content. And I should also say we have PDFs available of this content, or much of it, and we're working on making them into easy printouts, like two pages, double-sided, easy handouts that you can that include the author bio and the description of the book and discussion questions. So you'll find those when your programming begins as well. Okay, a little bit about how we chose the 4 new books in our library. So here's our criteria. The capacity to incite lively and deep discussion, the capacity to expand the range of voices, stories, and genres currently represented in our library, the capacity to interest lapsed and or reluctant readers, and capacity to challenge avid readers and introduce them to new voices, and the capacity to inspire innovative programming for communities. We've had these criteria for a while now, and they remain important. And we encourage you, in fact, to suggest a book to us. We love suggestions. In fact, there's a tab on our homepage, front and center, that says Suggest a Book. So based on these suggestions, staff compiles a list of titles with an eye, again, toward expanding our range of genres, expanding the diversity of voices and perspectives and themes and settings on our list. And while this wasn't necessary, we call it an interest in authors who are comfortable with audiences and willing to visit communities. And we then bring in an outside reading committee that may include, for example, former Big Read grantees, librarians, booksellers, book critics, literary presenters, and general readers, and they make their recommendations to staff. Okay, so our library currently includes 30 titles, 13 of which have been carried over from previous years, and here they are. And I just want to say here that, because I've been asked this before, that you're not more likely to get a grant if you choose one of the new titles. We really stand by the whole list. We're proud of the whole list, and if we kept a book on it, we're serious about encouraging you to check it out and choose it if you so wish. And it reverts back to the review criteria, really, if the book makes sense with your community. And these 13 titles on the list were added last year in an attempt to make the list more diverse and contemporary and reflective of themes that might resonate with audiences today. And among them are, for example, 2 books in translation, which is To Live by Yu Hua, and on the bottom right there, and Ways of Going Home by Alejandro Zambra. That one is from Chile. And we love when these books are discussed in the context of books in translation and what translation means, how hard it is to translate a book from another language into English, and what is gained, what is lost. We also have 3 poetry titles. Claudia Rankin's Citizen. We have Book of Hours by Kevin Young, and Joy Harger's How We Became Human. They're phenomenal poets. And we also, I should say that this program targets adults primarily, but there are often books on our list that are crossover. Kelly Link's Pretty Monsters, for example, is one of those crossover books. It's a book of short stories that is enjoyable by both and appealing to both adults and teenagers. Okay. And ta-da! Here are the 4 new books. We're really excited to work with these authors, as I can tell you that I know them, and all of them are super friendly and engaging and wonderful with audiences. We think you'll like them too, and they're powerful books. So I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about each one, and then turn it over to Josh. So here's Ron. Ron is an NEA fellow whose ancestors have called the Appalachian Mountains home since the mid-1700s. He's been called a national treasure, a writer of quiet and stunning beauty, and one of the best writers in America writing about Appalachia. And this is a material I'm sharing with you from our website, so it's all there. His parents worked in a textile mill in Chester, South Carolina, where Rash was born, and lived until the age of 8 when his family moved to Boiling Springs, North Carolina. And his father was a remarkable man, he said, a kid who dropped out of high school at 16 to work in the mill, and then through incredible perseverance got his GED, went to college while working full-time, and eventually became a college art teacher. And Ron, I'll tell you, is a writer of poetry and novels and short stories, and he is really interesting if you get him talking about what it's like to write in each of those genres. And the book itself is a collection of short stories about the people of Appalachia, lovingly rendered from the Civil War to the present, of farmers and office workers, soldiers and war widows, sheriffs and meth addicts, all trying to do their best in a world that isn't always easy. Noted the Washington Post, it, quote, finds a narrow sweet spot between Raymond Carver's minimalism and William Faulkner's Gothic. Highlighting the purity and precision of Rash's writing, Booklist calls the stories deceptively easy to read, as they are hard to forget. All right. Adrian Motika is a poet from Indiana who, in this collection of linked poems, gives voice to the life and legacy of Jack Johnson, the first African-American to claim the title of World Heavyweight Champion. Born in Germany to a military family, Adrian lived in army bases all across Europe and in 10 U.S. states before the age of 7. His family eventually settled in Indianapolis, where they lived in Section 8 housing, and he said he was, quote, a nearsighted and unathletic kid, a sci-fi comic book geek obsessed with outer space. He loves rap music, and he used to dream of being an MC. And he's published 4 books, and The Big Smoke was a finalist for the National Book Award, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. He's a fan of boxing since he was a kid. He did extensive research, in fact 2 years of research on Johnson's life before writing the book. And I will say, if there's any book that can turn non-readers into poetry lovers, we think this could be the one. Johnson was born to ex-slaves during the Jim Crow era and became one of the most famous people in the world when he claimed the title of World Heavyweight Champion in 1908, the first African-American to do so. And to Motika, to Adrian, the epic story of Johnson's rise and fall naturally lent itself to poetry. Quote, he managed to win the most coveted title in sports, says Adrian, but through the combination of his own hubris and the institutionalized racism of the time, he lost everything. And I will say the majority of the poems in the book are persona poems, that they're poetic monologues written in Johnson's voice, and some of them are written in the voices of the women in his life, and there's evidence of physical abuse of these women. But the persona pieces are also perhaps good for programming, encouraging writers to write their own persona poems. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch Review calls The Big Smoke, says The Big Smoke never labors. It reads more like a thriller. And I'll also tell you that Adrian is working on a graphic novel. So what's nice about programming for this book is that Johnson is well covered in print and on screen and on the stage, which, allows a nice entranceway here to discuss how poetry comes at a subject differently and can enhance our understanding of it. But I think his graphic novel on Johnson will also be out around this time next year, which provides another entryway into the subject matter and the work of poetry. So Alberto Rios. We love Alberto. He's so nice. Alberto Rios is an NEA Fellow and Arizona's first Poet Laureate. Has been featured in film. He's been set to music. His poems have been included in more than 300 national and international anthologies. And Alberto was born and raised in the high desert of southern Arizona, and during his childhood, his hometown of Nogales was split into, which he explains in his memoir, and it's great that he has a memoir out, which is really interesting, that it was split into first by an idea and then by a chain link fence. There was the American side, where Rios lived with his parents and brother right behind a Catholic church, and the Mexican side, where members of his extended family lived, and the fence has since been replaced with a steel wall. And Alberto has many books out. He's a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. He's a distinguished professor at Arizona State, where he's taught for more than 30 years. He's a beloved professor there. And this is his 13th book, and it's a collection that are filled with playful and tender homages to his home and everyday life. And the poems have been called playful, nostalgic, witty, imaginative, and funny. Says the Rumpus, it's easy to envision many of them being enjoyed by children as one hopes they are bound to be. Rios delivers, I'm quoting again, another stunning book of poems rich in impeccable metaphors that revel in the ordinariness of morning coffee and the crackle of thunderous desert storms. And I will also say that many of them were written for specific occasions, these poems. They're called occasional poems, like the dedication of a new park. And this can be a nice programming feature, having participants write their own poems in response to something new in their community. I'll mention this interesting tidbit, originally written for a play called Mexica. His poem, The Border, a double sonnet, was used by the rock band U2 during the tour of its album, The Joshua Tree. And Alberto learned the poem was being used when his son's friend, who was attending a U2 concert, sent a picture to Alberto's son of the poem projected on a giant screen. That's Alberto. And last but certainly not least is Roz Chast. She is a character. She's been a cartoonist for the New Yorker for decades. And I encourage you to read her bio on our website. She really is a character. She loves birds, including her pet African gray parrot named Eli, a misnamed female, whose vocabulary of words and phrases includes "you're fired." Fond of crafts, she has painted paisanki, which are Ukrainian decorated eggs, dabbled in the art of origami, designed dishes, and embroidered rugs depicting portraits of her late parents. She was an only child who in elementary school would make up math tests. She, quote, make up math tests and give them out to kids in class for fun. And she told CBS News, the formative book of my youth was the Merck Manual. I knew that, quote, sore throat was not mere sore throat but leprosy. I was terrified of lockjaw. Every week I would learn a new disease to be afraid of. And so this is her deeply poignant and hilarious memoir, complete with cartoons, sketches, and narrative storytelling about the conflicting emotions and practical challenges surrounding her parents' last years. And it's exciting because it's the first graphic memoir on our list. And it's about her parents. Her parents were in their mid-90s, living in the same rundown Brooklyn apartment they'd been in for 48 years, and where Chast grew up, when her mother's physical health and father's mental state necessitated a change. And her Chast, Roz's humor guides us through events all too familiar to many Americans, from cleaning out the detritus of her parents' cluttered apartment to the sudden learning curve and anxiety associated with wills and healthcare proxy and power of attorney forms, end-of-life directives, assisted living costs, and weird cravings for tuna fish sandwiches. I'm going to leave you with that because that's in her book. Called a tour de force, remarkable, a revelatory, deeply poignant, and laugh-out-loud funny. one of the great autobiographical memoirs of our time. These are all quotes from publications when it came out. It was a finalist for the National Book Award and winner of the Kirkus Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Books for a Better Life Award. Says the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, I want to recommend it to everyone I know who has elderly parents or might have them someday. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Josh. Josh, you with us?
I am indeed. So thanks,
Hi, Josh.
Amy, for walking us through all the books in the NEA library. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I just want to introduce myself formally. My name is Joshua Feist, and I am the Program Director for NEA Big Read at Arts Midwest. And just to reiterate, Arts Midwest manages the application and grant process of NEA Big Read. And I'm just looking at the participants list, and I see a lot of familiar names and a lot of new names. So that's so great to see so many folks interested in joining us today. So this is the application timeline, as you can see, and you've probably already read on your screen. So the applications for NEA Big Read are due at the end of January, and then they go through a review process where a panel reads every single application. And then after that is done and we get the list back of the top applications, we announce to the world about who will get a grant, and then we go on from there. So if you submit an application through Arts Midwest, which I will walk you through in just a few moments, that's the timeline you can expect after you submit your application. So as Amy mentioned, there's a new website at arts.gov, and that is your one-stop shop for all of the book-related content. So when you're deciding which book to apply for, you're going to want to take a look at that page on arts.gov. And if you could scroll down on the screen, you could see all titles available for you to pick from and peruse. So we've seen a quick preview of this content at arts.gov. And I'm going to walk you through the Arts Midwest website. So when it comes to applying for the grant, there's a handy link on the arts.gov homepage, which is pointed at with this arrow on the screen, and it's called Apply for a Grant, and that will take you to the Arts Midwest webpage. And by the way, in case you haven't noticed, the website address is there up at the top. So this is where you'll land after you click that link. And as you probably guessed, these pages are dedicated to helping you apply for a grant. And from this landing page, you'll be able to navigate between the web pages pertaining to the NEA Big Read by using the menu on the left-hand side of the screen. And here's a close-up of that left-hand navigation menu, and I realize that some of you might be following along on your own computers, exploring the site. So I'll make the tour a bit brief so we can get to the questions that you have for Amy and me at the end. But nevertheless, I wanted to emphasize a few key areas. The first area is found under the How to Apply section, and it's called Application Advice. Arts Midwest has processed thousands of applications, as you've seen through the stats that we offered at the beginning of this presentation. And we've fielded thousands of questions from applicants and grantees alike, and we've distilled all of those questions into our FAQ and application advice pages. So we really encourage you to check those out. On the next step of your journey, you'll go to the application process page, which is the landing page for accessing the guidelines and application instructions, as well as the online application itself. On the several pages, actually, of the Arts Midwest website, you'll find some sample applications that have received awards in the current cycle of grantees, so people who started this September. You can see what they submitted for their application, and that'll help give you a sense of how those applicants structured their responses and how much detail they provided, for example. So checking those out, we have 3 sample applications, and each one is from a different type of eligible organization. You can see them at the very bottom of the screenshot here on the right, from Monroe County, University of Wisconsin, and the National Steinbeck Center. So check those out. They do not necessarily reflect the questions that we're going to be asking you in the current application, but so we ask you to use them more of a guide rather than a verbatim way to look at the application. So another one of the major pieces of advice that we offer back in the application advice page is to read through the guidelines as thoroughly as you can before starting your application. So the guidelines, you can consider them as the blueprints for your application. They cover the how, what, when, where, and why of the program. They not only explain what the application contains, but they also explain the program expectations and the review criteria, or in other words, what the parameters of the panel of reviewers will be looking for when they read each application and when they make their scores on each application. There are also links in the guidelines to supplemental documents like the budget instructions to help you complete that aspect of the application. And we also have a offline template for preparing your application. So we feel that based on feedback, we've presented those tools for you. So again, please do read through the guidelines thoroughly and consider that webpage your handbook for the application process. Of course, myself at Arts Midwest and others on staff here are happy to answer any questions that you have at any time during the application process about anything NEA Big Read related. I know these slides are very exciting. You can access the online application from the application process page 2. It's where the blue arrow is obviously pointing right there. Please note that offline application template that I mentioned in the last slide is there and available for you because the online application itself cannot be saved, but the offline template, Word doc template is a mirror copy of the actual application. So we highly recommend that you take advantage of that and prepare your responses offline or in a Google Doc, whatever makes the most sense for you beforehand. So you can just copy and paste your responses into the application itself, and it makes the whole process a little bit less stressful. So feel free to actually go into the online application and check it out and see how things are presented. But just to reiterate, so nobody is surprised, that your progress can't be saved, but you can certainly go in and take a look and then come back when you're ready to complete the thing in one sitting. I'm happy to answer more questions about the application process at the end of the webinar, but first I'd like to showcase a few programming examples. And a common question that we get from applicants is what has been done for the book that I'm considering in the past in terms of Big Read programming. And to help answer this question, we've established a Pinterest account a couple of years ago, and we've been adding to it continuously as we get reports back from organizations that are funded through the program. And we pin the best examples of photos and promo materials submitted by former grantees and that we scour the web for. Our Pinterest boards correspond to the books on the list, so check out any boards for the books that you're considering applying for. And here's just a quick view of our Pinterest account. We also have some more general boards, as you can see in the first row, that cover more general topics like creative ideas, some marketing that's been done by past grantees, and some insights from past grantees on things that have challenged them, but more so what successes they've experienced and how they achieved those. So spend some time on Pinterest and get some inspiration from your own proposal, if nothing else. All right, on to some photos that we've received recently that highlight some of the programming examples from around the country. And in case it's not obvious, the Big Read, the NEA Big Read is a nationwide opportunity open to all 50 states and U.S. territories. So first, let me call your attention to the goal for these programs, which Amy talked a little bit about earlier, which is printed at the top right-hand side of your screen. And these programs should be enticing to readers and non-readers alike and serve to inspire participants to read the book by engaging with the content and themes of the book. And each program that you host should always tie back to the book in some way. At the top left is a photo of some ladies reading Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones in a hair salon in and around Atlanta, Georgia. And this book has a significant number of scenes in a hair salon, so it makes sense for some programs to happen in this type of setting. And for this particular program, participants could get copies of the book at the hair salon that was hosting the event and participate in an educational hairstyling workshop as well. At the bottom left is a snapshot from a survival workshop in a local school that ties into the book Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And that book is a post-apocalyptic dystopian book about characters living in a world after a big pandemic wipes out most of the population and they don't have any modern amenities like electricity, running water. And so a lot of grantees have opted to host events that deal with disaster preparedness and field medic type of instruction and general survival as well. On the bottom right is a kickoff event for Julia Alvarez, her book In the Time of the Butterflies, which centers around events in the Dominican Republic. And this event introduces participants of all ages to the culture of the Dominican Republic, particularly dance, and this happened in the Milwaukee Public Library. There are some programming requirements that do need to be met, and you can find those in the guidelines webpage, and I'm happy to answer questions about those. But the requirements, just to quickly state them, are holding a kickoff event to launch things off. There is a requirement to host a keynote event, which can be a panel of speakers, or if you choose, you can have the author come in. There are 10 book discussions, and then 2 to 3 special events involving other forms of artistic programming. So the example on the bottom right with the dancers in the library, that was their kickoff. And it also met the requirement for one of the 2 to 3 special events since it featured dance. Here's some more examples. Although we do have those requirements for programming, which I just mentioned, there is a lot of freedom in those requirements to tailor the program to what you think will resonate with your target audiences. So the example that we saw on the last slide of the dancers would again qualify as one of the 2 to 3 special events. And as you can see from the images on this slide, there are many other examples that can meet that requirement, such as an exhibition, which is pictured on the bottom right for Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. For the keynote event, as I mentioned, you may want to choose to invite the author to come to your community or have a panel of speakers covering some theme or topic from the book. And there's Tim O'Brien on the bottom left greeting a participant at his talk and signing books for that long line behind them. And at the top is a poetry slam, which was done for Citizen and American Lyric, which is a very popular book for the current grant cycle. I do want to say one thing about the book discussion requirement, because a lot of people do find it challenging to meet this particular requirement. And again, we offer quite a lot of freedom for these events, so it does not have to be a book discussion in the traditional book club sense or everyone gathers around a table in a room, eats cookies, and talks about the book. So long as there is some back and forth dialogue about the book at any event, it can meet the criteria for a book discussion. An example of that would be if you're choosing to have a theatrical presentation of a scene from the book, and there's a talkback period with the audience afterwards and books are available, that would fulfill the criteria for a book discussion. So I know that was a very brief overview of the application process and some quick programming example resources available to you, but we do want to make sure we allow enough time for your questions. So please let us know if you have any, and if you don't get your question answered live, rest assured that a staff member, either myself or another from Arts Midwest or the NEA, will follow up with you after the webinar concludes. If you don't have any questions at the top of your mind right now, that's okay. We can field questions at a later time. You can use the information on your screen to get in touch with us here at Arts Midwest.
Thanks so much, Josh. As a reminder, you can enter a question by clicking the Q&A icon at the top of your screen. Feel free to submit a question and we'll answer it to the best we can. To start us off, we have a fairly straightforward question. How many Big Read applications are submitted each year? Josh, would you mind answering that for us?
Sure. So with 75 grants, there's a lot of competition, and it is a nationwide opportunity, as I mentioned. So we get several applications from each state, and we get about over 200 applications each time.
Great. Thank you, Josh. And this is Lauren Miller at the NEA. Another question just came in. Have there been any Big Read programs conducted in Spanish? Josh, can you think of any examples that a Big Read programs have incorporated either programming in other languages or cultures?
Yeah, we do have some books on the list that are more geared towards Spanish audiences, and the book I mentioned by Julia Alvarez, In the Time of the Butterflies, is one of those. We also continue to have Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya, and I'll just mention a few others. Into the Beautiful North by Luis Alberto Urrea is another one of those books. And for those books, if you go on the arts.gov website and you click into the book, you'll see that we do have a reader's guide available in Spanish for those titles, not all of them, just a few. So whenever a community picks that book and they apply for it, they usually incorporate some plans to reach Spanish-speaking audiences, and that can include, but not limited to, book discussions in Spanish or bilingual book discussions. I know for a fact that the author of Into the Beautiful North, Luis Urrea, has done some presentations when he visits Big Read communities in Spanish and in English. So those are some just brief examples of programming done in Spanish. And if you want to fulfill your keynote programming requirement with some local professors or artists or experts in your community, you can offer those presentations in Spanish as well. And if you get in touch with me at Arts Midwest, I can dig up a more comprehensive list of what's been done in Spanish as well, if you need some assistance.
Thanks so much, Josh. We received a follow-up question related to what you were speaking about. Someone asked, are some of the books available in Spanish?
Yeah, the ones that I mentioned are definitely available in Spanish. I don't believe that every single one has a Spanish counterpart, but those three definitely do. Off the top of my head, I do believe that Station 11, which I cited briefly, is also available in Spanish. I think that particular book, since it's relatively new, I happen to know the statistic that it's been translated into more than 12 different languages. I can't speak with certainty for the others, but if you are considering applying for a book, you can always reach out to a book wholesaler of your choice, or check on worldcat.org, which is a very useful website to see all the different editions for any book you're considering.
Great, thank you. Questions come in regarding partnerships for a Big Read grant. Someone asked, I am considering applying with our local high school as our partner. Is that okay? Josh, can you expand a little bit more about the partnerships of Big Read grants and possible partners, organizations, and applicants might consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, to answer the question, yes, absolutely do partner with local schools. That's a way, an easy way to raise visibility for your local programs as well as engagement. And oftentimes, if you can engage the classrooms, the parents will kind of come in as a bonus. And if you take a look at the guidelines on the Arts Midwest website, you'll see some of the examples that we give for partners and eligible organizations. And let me see here. For a partnership requirement, if you are not applying as a library, there is a requirement that you partner with a library. If you're applying as a library, then you can partner with all the organizations in your community that will help you fulfill the programming that you're proposing. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the guidelines. One of the criteria that the review panel will be looking at is the breadth and relevance of your partners. And again, if you want more information on that, I'd be happy to speak with you or email with you one-on-one.
As a follow-up to that question, they asked if we have programs just at the high school or one location, is that okay? Josh, would you mind answering that?
Sure. I think the goals that we mentioned for the program, getting the events that you hold to tie back to the book are very important, but it's also important for the NEA Big Read to be as broad in your community as possible. We do have organizations that have been funded in the past that concentrate programs either at the library and some in the school, but I think your application will have a better chance if you make the program as big as possible, and we include the word big in the program name for that reason. As much as you can do to involve the community at large, the better chance your application will have. And in order to make something truly bigger, it usually comes down to who you're planning to partner with, because let's be honest, you can't do something on this scale by yourself. You shouldn't, even though you probably could. We don't think you should. We should allow the partners to carry the load. So if you can, I would encourage you to take that school on as a partner and see who else in the community would make sense to partner with. Gather them all at the same table and just discuss what you can do, what each organization can bring to the table, either in terms of resources or events.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Our next question is in regard to reaching out to authors to speak at a Big Read event and how they might contact the author. Your best bet is to contact someone at the NEA or Arts Midwest with the email or phone number on your screen currently. We can provide you information regarding to authors. Josh, do you have anything else you'd like to just regarding that?
I'll just add that it's quite convenient that some authors are more open about how to contact and request speaker visit. Julie Atsuka, Emily St. John Mandel, I believe, are very open on their own author websites about how to go about that process. But the quickest and easiest way is to contact Arts Midwest, and we'll give you the appropriate pathway in order to reach the author's publicist or speaker manager.
Great. Our next question is, what is a maximum length of the program period that's allowed? We typically recommend NEA Big Read program lasts around 1 month, but that can vary a little. Josh, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah. We do recommend that your programming occurs over the period of a month, and that is set in order to maximize impact and to minimize fatigue. And by fatigue, I mean both from an administrative perspective and also an audience perspective. However, if you're planning to reach different audiences throughout the course of your programming, it would make sense to run a longer program. We have had grantees that program all the way from September through June, but in that span of time, they reach different segments of the community, and there's not a whole lot of overlap, so the same audience isn't getting hit with Big Read events for a book that they've read for months now. So, for instance, I'm going to hop over you a bit, Lauren, and see that there is a question about partnering with a juvenile detention center. And, of course, that is acceptable and allowed as well, and that's a segment of the population that would receive its own programming, which could occur through the course of the month as you're reaching more public audiences, but it also could occur afterwards, since that's an entirely different segment of the population that you're reaching.
Great, thank you. We have a specific question regarding programming. The question is, can the kickoff event also double as the keynote event? For instance, if the kickoff features the author, would that count for both requirements?
Yes,
Josh,
absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of applicants and grantees do choose to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, with those requirements, and they either have the author come in right at the beginning of their programs or keep it as the carrot at the end of the stick at the end of the programs after the month of programming concludes and they have built up enough momentum for the author to come and speak. So yes, that would count as a kickoff and the keynote.
Great. We have a question about what books would be good for young audiences or teens. Amy or Josh, would you like to chime in about what books might be good for a younger audience?
Josh, I would love your input if you have heard back from grantees. I mean, I'm a mom myself, so I pay particular attention. I think the vast majority of our books certainly can. I say it's for an adult audience, but we also choose books that are pretty accessible and okay, that are crossovers. But there are certain books that are particularly targeted to both, and that's why I mentioned Kelly Link's book, because she has several collections out, but we picked this one, Pretty Monsters, because it is actually targeted to a YA audience, and it's nice because it's also enjoyable for adults. And we kind of hope that, wouldn't it be fun to have a book where a parent or a teacher and a student can both enjoy it and then talk about it. But certainly Station 11 has been enjoyed, Ursula Le Guin. I'm looking over this whole list, and I'm not seeing much that I would necessarily shy away from for content reasons or language or anything like that. It's just more of an interest. But Josh, have you had feedback from grantees?
Yeah, I'll add to that a bit. I do agree with Amy that Kelly Link's Pretty Monsters and Station 11 are right up the alley for young adult readers. I have heard back about Tim O'Brien, The Things They Carried, and although that's a Vietnam War novel, I do believe that some school curricula, high school curricula, carry that book. Personally, I was in a class in college. I'd still consider myself young at that point, for reading Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. I know that True Grit by Charles Portis, that has reached all age groups. And while the younger audiences may not have read that book specifically, they participated in some of the NEA Big Read events that were Western themed, and they had their own companion book that the younger audiences read. Into the Beautiful North, since it is more of a type of whimsical book, I guess you could say, and the writing's not terribly complicated, and it reads really fast. I know that book has been read by younger audiences as well. So that's what I've heard back from the communities. Citizen, An American Lyric is one of the new books that we just added to the library last year, but I know high school audiences are taking on that book and in some programming with essay contests and talkbacks and programming of that nature.
I mean, I'll also say put a plug in for the Roundhouse because it's based on a character who is 13, I think. So interesting perspective there. And Alberto Rios, as I mentioned, many of his poems would be enjoyed by high school students, and so and even the late homecomer is powerful. So really, I would encourage you to kind of look at these books with all of these books with that lens.
Thank you, Josh and Amy. For the last question for today, we have a question about eligibility, whether a school can apply. Josh, can you walk us through what kind of organizations are eligible to apply for a Big Read grant?
Sure. So let me get to my notes here. So for schools, institutions of higher learning, such as colleges and universities, are eligible to apply for NEA Big Read. Unfortunately, individual K through 12 schools, whether they are public or private, are not eligible to apply for a grant directly, but they can partner with other eligible organizations. And I believe this kind of goes back to the question that was posed by a participant member, if they can get their local high school involved. So that would be a way to get the high school involved. There's a little bit more nuance here, but local education agencies, school districts, and state or regional education agencies are also eligible to apply directly. So it's really only K through 12 schools that are ineligible. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Josh. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're available and ready to answer your questions. Please contact us by the contact information on your screen. We're happy to answer any other questions you might have after today's meeting. I want to thank Josh and Amy for today, and thank you for attending this afternoon's webinar.